The sun hung low, swollen and heavy, like an old wound that refused to close. It bled gold across the warped rooftops of Parlow Ridge, casting the town in a shimmer of regret. Dust curled in slow spirals through the still air, kicked up by boots too tired to care where they landed. The smell of whiskey and sweat clung to the wood of the saloon porch like mold, and above it all rose the muttering hum of townsfolk drawn like flies to spectacle. They came not for justice nor mercy. They came because it was easier to point at someone else's ruin than to look their own in the eye. At the center of it stood a woman who did not speak. Her name was Clara Wren, though no one used it now. She was barefoot, clothed in a worn dress that had once been cream, but now bore the hue of old parchment. Her hair was pinned tight, but strands had broken loose and danced along her cheekbones. Her chin was up, eyes fixed on nothing, everything all at once. Her silence unnerved them more than screams would have. Beside her, two little girls stood like shadows sewn to her hem, twins with big, solemn eyes and sun-browned arms. They mirrored each other in stillness, as if even their breath had been trained into matching rhythm. One clutched a frayed rag doll. The other held her sister's hand, tighter than most grown men held a gun. The man who'd brought them there swayed on his feet, a jug swinging from two fingers like a sickle. "This here's what I got," he slurred, voice cracking into a laugh that startled even himself. "Widow, barely 30, can't speak, can't hear. Barely worth the food it takes to keep her upright. But she's got strong hips and quiet manners. That counts for something, don't it?" He pointed a crooked finger toward the girls. "2 extras for the price of 1. Don't cry none. Ain't no trouble. Damn near raised themselves." Someone in the crowd spat. Another chuckled. One woman turned away, clutching her shawl like it might shield her from the stench of it all. No one stepped forward. Clara did not blink. Her jaw was set like weathered stone. When her father, the man she still sometimes dreamed might apologize, jerked the rope tied around her wrists, she stumbled only slightly. The girls didn't cry. They had already learned there was no use in it. A voice rose from the far end of the porch. Low, gravel-edged. "How much?" The crowd parted slowly, like cattails in a marsh disturbed by a snake. He was tall, broad, dust-coated from hat to spur. A man built not like a gunfighter, but like the land itself, rough, quiet, unmovable. Silas Crow. The townsfolk knew him only in fragments. Some said he'd fought in the war. Others claimed he'd once shot a man dead for beating a horse. He lived alone out on the North Trail, where the grass grew taller and the wind always seemed to carry secrets. No one knew what he wanted. No one knew what he felt. And that made folks uneasy. The drunk sneered, lifting his jug in mock salute. "Well now, ain't you come late to the sermon? Thought you liked your critters four-legged." Silas said nothing. Just stepped forward, one slow bootfall at a time, until he stood before Clara. His eyes weren't sharp like a blade, they were slow, deep, like something sinking beneath a lake and never quite surfacing again. He looked at her, not the rope, not the bruises half hidden under her sleeves, not the hush on her lips. He looked at her. "How much?" he asked again. The drunk scratched at his neck. $3. That's for all of 'em. Take 'em or don't." Silas didn't haggle. He pulled coins from his coat and dropped them in the dirt. The man scooped them up with more urgency than pride, then stumbled away with a laugh that made no one laugh with him. The rope slackened. Silas knelt slowly, untied Clara's wrists, and set the frayed rope on the ground like something that should never be used again. The twins watched, eyes wide but dry. He stood and looked down at them. "You got names?" They said nothing. Looked to their mother. She nodded once. The smallest girl whispered, "I'm Maisie." "That's Lark." Silas gave them a slow, almost invisible nod. "All right then. Come on." No one stopped them. No one dared. The crowd drifted apart like smoke with no wind to carry it. They rode out of Parlow Ridge in silence. Clara on the mule behind Silas, the twins huddled in a worn saddlebag turned cradle. The trail stretched out like an old scar across the land, unhealed, familiar. He didn't speak to her on the ride. Not out of rudeness, but respect. He figured if she'd wanted to be talked at, she'd have stayed behind. He let the hooves speak for them instead. Clop, clop, like a heartbeat carrying the four of them somewhere not quite new, but not quite ruined. When the ranch crested into view, a patch of dry grass, a barn that leaned westward, and a stone house nestled among cottonwoods, Clara finally stirred. She blinked slowly, lips parting as if tasting the air for the first time. It was quiet. Not the kind of quiet made by fear or grief. The kind made by choice. Silas helped the girls down first. Then he offered a hand to Clara. She didn't take it. She climbed down on her own, slow but sure. He led them into the house. One room had 2 cots and a basin. He motioned. "This'll be yours. You and the girls." Still no words from her. He pointed to the water pump, then to the hearth. Demonstrated how the flint worked with a practiced hand. The girls watched, fascinated. Clara simply nodded. Before he stepped out, he paused. "There's food in the kitchen. You'll find what you need." She turned her head slightly, eyes flicking to his lips, then back to the floor. He waited. Not for thanks, he didn't expect it. Just waited, in case she wanted to say something. She didn't. That night, he stood on the porch, chewing on the stem of a dried clover. The sky above was bruised purple, the stars just starting to press through like fireflies behind muslin. Inside, he could hear the creak of the bed frame. A small laugh, one of the girls. He'd meant to ask if they needed anything else. But he didn't move. Inside, Clara sat beside the girls, brushing their hair with fingers that still remembered how to be gentle. They clung to her, warm and safe in a way they hadn't dared hope for. When Maisie whispered, "Mama, do you think he's good?" Clara didn't answer aloud, but her eyes softened. She rose after they'd fallen asleep, walked to the small window, and looked out. Silas was there, still quiet, watching the stars like a man who knew their names. She watched him watching. Then, very faintly, under her breath, so soft it might have been the breeze through the cottonwoods, she hummed, "Just one bar. Just enough." He turned his head. Didn't say a word, but he'd heard it. And he wondered then, not for the first time, but with more certainty, if the silence she wore wasn't her burden, but her shield. And maybe, just maybe, it was coming down. He stayed on the porch until the moon crested full. Not to guard, not to spy, just to be near. Because something had arrived with her. And he wasn't sure what it was yet, but it made the ranch feel different. Alive. Waiting. The days passed like smoke rings, lazy slow but never still. June spilled her heat across the plains, curling the grasses and fattening the clouds until they burst in short, angry storms that left steam rising from the soil. Life on the ranch unfolded in long silences and soft glances, with the rhythm of chores threading the hours together, like beads on twine. Clara rose before the rooster most mornings, barefoot on the worn pine floor, moving like a whisper through the house. She fetched water, swept ash from a hearth, knelt beside the girls' cots, and brushed the tangles from their hair with patient fingers. They clung to her still, not from fear, but habit, as if they believed the moment they let go the world would split open again. She never asked questions, never made demands, just worked steadily, silently, beside Silas when he showed her how to feed the hens or mend the stall door where a mule had kicked through. She watched his hands more than his face, memorizing the way his fingers curled around tools, how he tested rope for weakness with small, precise tugs. She never missed a thing, but she never responded to his words. So he began talking less, and watching more. It unsettled him, the way she knew where he'd be before he arrived, the way her eyes found him just before he turned, the way she seemed to read the air the same way others read ink and parchment. One afternoon, as the sun baked the dust until it gleamed like copper, Silas noticed something odd. The girls were playing in the tall grass near the barn, Lark tugging Maisie in a rusted wheelbarrow, both shrieking with laughter. Clara was nearby, kneeling with a basket of eggs, her back turned. Lark let out a yelp. She'd hit a rock and stumbled, knee bloodied. Before the cry had even finished echoing, Clara had dropped the basket and was running. Not walking, not guessing, running. She reached Lark before Silas could even rise from the trough where he was washing up. He watched from the porch, brow furrowed. There had been no cue, no tug at the sleeve, no message from the other twin. Just sound. It was the first time he allowed the thought to form fully. She heard that. That night, he didn't sit on the porch. He lingered in the kitchen instead, polishing an old rifle he hadn't used in months, just for something to do with his hands. He watched her out of the corner of his eye as she worked at the counter, scrubbing potatoes, checking the stew, coaxing the kettle flame higher. When he spoke, it was deliberate. "Storm's coming tomorrow." She paused only slightly, tilted her head. "You'll want to bring the sheets in tonight." Another pause. Then she moved, went straight to the line outside, before the words could even settle. Silas set the rifle down. He followed her. The wind had picked up, rustling the cottonwoods until they sounded like old paper tearing. Clara worked quickly, pulling clothespins free with practiced fingers, folding the sheets over one arm. He stepped beside her, close enough to catch the scent of lavender soap still clinging to her sleeves. She didn't turn. "I don't think you're deaf." She froze. The air between them stiffened, stretched. Still, she said nothing. Silas spoke slower now, quieter. "You hear things. Not always. Not everything. But enough." Her shoulders rose, then dropped in a breath, not quite sigh, not quite surrender. He waited. She turned, just slightly, and looked at him. And for the first time since she arrived, her mouth opened with intent. Her voice, when it came, was dry. Brittle as dry leaves pressed in the back of a family Bible. "Some things I hear," she said. "Some things I don't. But I stopped answering long before I stopped hearing." Silas swallowed hard. The weight of those words hung between them like a rope not yet cut loose. She turned back toward the house. And then she added, so soft he almost missed it, "It's easier when people think you're not listening." That night, long after the girls were asleep and the crickets tuned their wings to the darkness, Silas sat alone by the barn with a bottle of rye he hadn't touched since last winter. He looked at the stars, trying to figure what it meant, this woman who could hear but chose not to, this house that used to echo with loneliness but now carried the faint sound of humming. She wasn't like anyone he'd known. She didn't want saving. She didn't ask for softness or offer confession. She carried herself like a locked room with windows, not doors. But damn if he didn't want to know what lived inside it. The next morning brought more than just the storm. It began as thunder in the distance, low, steady, the kind you felt more than heard. Silas had been repairing a fence line, hammer in hand, when he saw the riders on the horizon. 3 of them, wide hats, long coats, dust kicked up like a trailing serpent. He felt the weight in his gut before he even made out their faces. When they drew close enough, the lead man tipped his hat and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. "Silas," he drawled, "heard you picked up a stray." Silas said nothing, just watched him, jaw tight. The second man spat tobacco. "Heard she came with twins. Girls. Quiet ones." The third man was silent. He just stared at the house like it owed him something. Silas didn't move. "I bought her fair," he said. "Not that it's your concern." The lead man grinned wider. "See, that's the thing. Her daddy owed us. Bad hand of cards and some whiskey made promises he didn't get to keep. He gave us a claim on anything of value." He leaned forward. "And now that she's cleaned up and got a roof, well, she's worth a whole lot more than $3. Silas stepped forward slowly. His hands were empty, but his posture was not. "She ain't for sale." The wind shifted. The horses danced slightly under the tension. "You sure you want to make this a fight, Crow? There's 3 of us. One of you." From the porch, the door creaked. Clara stood there, the twins behind her, clutching the hem of her skirt. She said nothing, but her eyes found Silas. Then, calmly, she walked down the steps, hands steady. She moved past Silas without a word and faced the riders. She didn't flinch. Not when the lead man tipped his hat again. Not when the second man sneered and muttered something under his breath. She raised her chin and spoke, voice clear now. Worn but strong. "I am not his to give. Not yours to take." The lead man's grin cracked. "Well now," he said slowly, "the little mouse does talk." Clara didn't move. "You want to claim me," she said. "You'd best be ready to bury something first." The silence that followed was thick as tar. Silas stepped beside her. His voice came low and cold. "You heard the lady." The men exchanged glances. But something in Clara's stance, something in the weight of her quiet defiance, made even their pride blink. The lead rider jerked his reins. "Not over," he warned. "Debt don't disappear just because you pretend it ain't there." And then they turned, hooves thundering back into the horizon. The storm broke moments later, hard rain slicing the sky in ribbons. Clara didn't move until the last echo faded. Then, slowly, she exhaled. Silas didn't ask if she was all right. He just stood beside her. And for the first time, she reached out, not because she needed saving, but because she wanted to be seen. Her fingers brushed his, light as falling ash. Then she turned, walking back toward the porch. He followed. Inside, the twins were lighting a lantern. Shadows danced against the walls. and though the rain hammered down, the house felt warmer than it ever had. But outside, somewhere in the dark, a debt waited, unpaid, unforgotten, and it would come knocking. The sky stayed gray for 2 days straight after the men rode off, as if the storm had left something behind, something that wasn't quite done. Rain tapped the windows like fingers testing for weakness, and the wind howled through the eaves like a hungry dog. The kind of weather that made the world feel paused, holding its breath. Inside, the house adjusted. Clara was quieter, if such a thing was possible. Not from fear, Silas sensed, but calculation. Her movements sharpened. Her eyes lingered on doors, hinges, the length of the hall between bedrooms. She began stacking kindling not just in the hearth, but near the rear exit. She took stock of the food stores twice in a day and marked something unseen in her head when she did. Silas didn't ask. He didn't need to. He knew preparation when he saw it. The girls, blissfully unaware of the weight hanging above, continued as children do, absorbing tension like sponges, but not understanding its shape. Lark had started drawing in the dirt with a stick, making patterns Silas didn't recognize. Maisie hummed under her breath when she worked beside Clara, but only when the woman was within reach. At night, they no longer asked for stories. They just curled up against each other, like pups, and slept deep. On the third day, the sun returned. It poured down on the soaked earth like an apology. Steam rose from the fence posts. Birds sang cautiously. Silas was out in the field, checking for washout near the irrigation ditch, when he heard the creak of a wagon on the road. Not fast, but deliberate, like a snake that knew it didn't have to rush. He stepped up onto the rise, hand shading his eyes. It was the same 3 men. But this time they weren't alone. A 4th man rode behind the wagon. Older, taller, coat too fine for the dust. He sat like a man used to being watched, with a long-barreled rifle resting against his knee, unhurried. The kind of man who didn't need a shout to be heard. Silas didn't go for a weapon. Not yet. He walked calmly down the hill, boots sinking slightly in the wet ground. He met them by the split-rail fence and waited. The wagon stopped. The 4th man dismounted. He didn't smile, didn't remove his hat. Just looked at Silas the way a banker looks at a ledger before closing a farm. "You Silas Crow." Silas nodded once. "You're harboring property." Silas said nothing. His hands stayed by his sides, but tension coiled through him like drawn wire. She was spoken for, promised by blood. Her father was a drunk and a liar, but the ink on the note was clean. She's got value. Her and the brats both. From behind the house, the barn door creaked open. Clara stepped out. Her hair was tied back. Her dress cinched tighter than usual. In her hands was a pitchfork, not held like a tool, but a warning. The older man turned to her, and something in his eyes flickered. "Clara." Her name in his mouth sounded like ownership. "You got no say in this. That debt don't vanish just because you run to a weak man with land and chickens." She didn't answer. Instead, she walked forward, slow and straight, and planted herself beside Silas. Her shoulders didn't touch his, but her presence might as well have been armor. Silas spoke then, voice low, clipped. "She's not property. She's a person, and she's under my roof." The man stared at him. "You think that means something to me? You'd be surprised what means something to a man with a rifle and nothing left to lose." The older man raised a brow. "Is that you now? Nothing left?" Silas didn't blink. Been that way a while. The man glanced past him toward the house, toward the windows where small eyes likely watched. Then he stepped forward. "I'll give you a choice," he said. "You hand her over, quiet-like, or we burn the place down and take what we want from the ashes. One way or another, that debt gets paid." Clara's voice cut in, sharp and sudden. "I'll go." Silas turned to her, eyes narrowing, but she kept looking at the man. "I'll go with you. You leave the girls. You leave this place. And you leave him." The older man chuckled. "No, no. See, that's not how this works. You don't get to set terms. You're not in the position for deals." She didn't flinch. "Then you get nothing." The man's eyes turned cold. "We'll see about that." He motioned to the others. They started dismounting. Silas's body tensed. His hand inched toward the shed beside the fence. His shotgun was inside, leaned against the wall from last season's coyote run. Too far, too slow, but Clara moved faster. She lunged, not toward the men, toward the fence post. She yanked something loose, rusted wire, pulled tight for years, and with one fluid motion swung it like a flail. The lead rider took it full in the face, howling as blood poured down his cheek. Chaos exploded. Silas tackled the second man before he could draw. They hit the mud hard. Fists found ribs. Boots found knees. Somewhere a gun went off, shattering glass, not flesh. The older man stayed mounted, Comet first, until Clara was suddenly at his side, driving the pitchfork up through his stirrup. The horse screamed, reared. The man went down hard. He hit the earth with a grunt, weapons skidding away. By the time the dust settled, 2 of the men were down. Groaning, one had fled, leaving a trail of blood behind. Clara stood in the yard, panting, dress soaked with sweat and rain and mud. Her arms shook, not from fear, from rage. Silas looked at her, really looked, and saw the truth. She had been running not from weakness, but from the fear of what she might become if she stopped. A woman who would never be caged again. The older man rolled onto his side, coughing. He looked up at her with something that was not quite hate. "You think this is over?" Clara stepped forward. "No," she said quietly. "I think it's just begun." Silas picked up the man's rifle. He didn't aim it, just held it, steady. "Next time you send men," he said, "you better send more." The man spat blood, and then he smiled. "More's already coming." Silas froze. "What does that mean?" The man coughed again, eyes gleaming. "You're not the only one watching out for her. She's worth more than you know." He looked at Clara now, as if seeing her for the first time. "Whatever your daddy did, whatever deal he made, it wasn't just over a bottle. You carry more than his debt." He chuckled, bitter and wheezing. "You carry a secret some folk would kill for." Then he passed out. Clara stood still, silent, but Silas saw it, the smallest shift in her eyes. Fear, not for herself, but for the girls. He stepped beside her, rifle in hand. We'll find out what he meant later. She didn't nod, but her hand slipped into his again. Outside, the sun had vanished. Clouds were gathering anew. The wind picked up, cooler now. And somewhere far off, the sound of hooves returned. Not one rider. Many. The sound came first, hoofbeats like war drums, steady and slow, announcing themselves with the arrogance of men who never expected resistance. Silas and Clara stood in the yard, their boots sunk in fresh mud, hands stained with grit and blood, watching the distant dust rise. They had hours, maybe less. No more than that. Behind them, the girls watched from shadows of the porch. Maisie clutched a doll that had long since lost its face, while Lark gripped the banister like it might anchor her to the earth. Neither spoke. They didn't cry. Children knew when the world tilted, and theirs had. Clara wiped her hands on her skirt, then moved toward the house without a word. She returned with a satchel, a worn leather bag, heavy with something more than supplies, and placed it on the porch steps. She looked at Silas then. Really looked. "You don't have to stay." Silas snorted. "You really think I've spent all these years holding ghosts at bay just to run from a living?" She didn't smile, but something behind her eyes softened. He nodded at the satchel. "That what they want?" She hesitated, then unbuckled it. Inside were 2 things, a bundle of letters tied with fraying red twine, and a small, ornate box made of dark, oil-rubbed wood. Silas had seen boxes like that once before in the war, carried by scouts with orders too dangerous to speak aloud. He didn't reach for it. "Your father leave that." Clara nodded, said it was the only thing in this world worth running with, or dying for. "And the letters?" "Proof," she said simply. "Names, codes, land deeds, blackmail, if you read between the lines." Silas stared down at all. "You could have sold this, bartered, bought your freedom." "I could have," she agreed. "But every man who ever wanted it wanted me thrown in with the bargain." He nodded once, then turned toward the rising dust. The road bent east just past the ravine, where the fields dropped off into scrub and gullies. They'd come from there, 10 riders at least, maybe more. But they weren't rushing. That was the worst part. They rode like men who believed the world owed them its knees. Silas took the shotgun down from where it hung near the barn door and loaded it with calm, practiced hands. Then he handed Clara a pistol, clean, oiled, light in the grip. She took it. No hesitation. "We'll hold the line," he said. She gave him a look. "This isn't a battlefield." "It is now." They moved with eerie synchronization, nailing boards over windows, overturning the table to form a barricade in the front room, dragging the heavy hutch across the floor to block the rear. The girls were ushered into the cellar, with Clara kneeling before them like a soldier briefing young cadets. "You don't come out until I say. If something happens, you follow the tunnel. You remember where it ends." Maisie nodded. Lark whispered, "The dry creek." "Good girls," Clara said. Her voice cracked then, just once. Silas turned from the stairwell before he could hear more. By the time the first shot rang out, the sun was halfway behind the hills, casting the world in gold-edged shadow. It didn't hit the house, just a warning shot, fired high. An announcement. Silas stood on the porch with the shotgun resting against his shoulder. A tall man dismounted and stepped forward. He wore a gray coat trimmed in silver thread and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His face was too clean for the trail. His voice, when it came, was smooth as liquor left to age in oak. "Mr. Crow, I take it you're the one made the mistake of getting involved." Silas said nothing. "You're harboring a fugitive, a woman who's stolen government property. That little box inside your home contains state secrets, and the female in question is a deserter and a traitor." Silas stared. "Nice speech," he said finally. "Bit late for lies, don't you think?" The man smiled. "You think this is about debt and whiskey and old family feuds? That woman's father wasn't just some bar-owning drunk. He worked with engineers, cartographers, men who draw the lines between empires. That box holds the original maps, territory claims, river diversions, mineral rights, war routes. Whoever controls it can redraw the West." Silas let that hang in the air. "And you think you're the man to do it?" "I think I'm the only one with the will." Clara's voice cut in from behind the barricade. "Then you'll need more than a will." The man tilted his head. "Clara." She stepped into the doorway, pistol steady. "I should have known you'd crawl your way to the top, Preston." He smiled again, showing too many teeth. "You always had a sharp tongue. And you always needed others to fight your battles." A flick of his wrist, and two men stepped forward. Silas lifted the shotgun. "That's close enough." Preston sighed. "You'd kill for her? You barely know her." Silas's voice was quiet. "I've seen enough to know what's worth standing for." Preston paused, then said simply, "You won't win." Silas didn't blink. "I don't need to." Then everything exploded. Gunfire cracked from the left, Clara's shot catching one rider in the leg. Silas fired once, twice, took down another. Splinters flew as bullets hit the porch posts. Glass shattered behind them. Inside, smoke began to curl from a torch flung through the kitchen window. Clara ran to stomp out, coughing. Silas reloaded behind cover, hard hammering not from fear, but from grim certainty. They weren't going to hold forever. But they didn't have to. In the cellar, the girls waited. The earth trembled with the sound of gunfire. Then a different sound, fainter. A low whine, like wind through wire. Then louder. A whistle. And then the ground shook harder. Outside, the riders froze. A distant rumble came from the hills to the east. Preston turned. "What?" And then the sky cracked open. It wasn't thunder. It was dynamite. The ridge by the creek exploded in fire and rock, revealing a line of armed men, rough, dusty, grim-eyed, emerging from the gully with rifles and pistols and hate in their bones. Miners, ranchers, old soldiers, Clara's insurance. Preston's mouth dropped open. She stepped back onto the porch beside Silas, breathing hard, pistol lowered. "I sent letters," she said simply, "to every man my father crossed. Promised them gold. Promised them land. Promised them revenge." Silas turned to her. "You played them all." She nodded. "Including you." And for the first time, she smiled. Down the road, chaos broke. The riders fled. Preston shouted, fired, but the sound was lost in the roar of justice delivered by tired, angry men with nothing left to lose. In the yard, Silas lowered the shotgun. Clara holstered her pistol. "Is it over?" he asked. Clara looked toward the rising sun on the far horizon. "No," she said, "but it's ours now." And behind them, the girls emerged from the cellar, blinking in the light, stepping into a future that was no longer running, but rising.